Hello again and welcome back. In this lecture, I'm going to talk about conversion tools. Now, we typically talk about two different types of conversion tools, and you're familiar with some of them already. And these two types are types that convert between different data formats and different data types. And when I say data formats, I mean file extensions. So for converting from a shapefile to a file geodatabase feature class converts between different formats. And you're used to that already. Converting between different data types like raster to vector, that's the part that's new to you, and that's the part I'm going to focus on right here with a slight little bit of information on converting between different data formats as well. So what are we looking at here? Well, remember when we took the Valmeyer slope layer when we introduced raster calculator and subsetted it using raster calculator to the areas that were less than a certain slope? Well, that's what I did here. Is I generated a new layer in raster calculator where the slope is less than 10 degrees. So the areas in the dark green here are the areas where it was not less than 10 degrees, so it was steeper, and the areas in the lighter green are areas where it was less than 10 degrees. And let's say I wanted to do some analysis on this. I wanted to either use it for tabulate area or for spatial joining or some other information. Maybe I wanted to intersect it with some buffers. I could convert this to a vector layer now. So let's go take a look at the conversion tools that are available to us. Those are in the conversion tools toolbox. And from the moment we expand it, we can see that there are a lot of options. And one thing I want to point out is that lots of these are converting between different data types. So they're just importing different features. So we have like importing data from our GPS as a feature class, or importing KML files as layers in our map document, or converting PDFs to GeoTIFFs or something like that. Those are all data format conversions, not data type conversions where we switch from vector to raster or vice versa. So if we look at the from raster tool set, we can convert raster to ASCII files, which we haven't covered yet, but we can also convert them to points, polygons, and polylines, as well as making time-lapse videos from them. In this case, what we really want to do is convert our raster to polygon. So if I open that tool, it's going to be fairly straightforward. I provide it the input raster. I tell it which field it is, which is value with the raster. And then I give it the output, which is slope less than 10 degrees. And it gives me the option to simplify polygons. If I don't simplify polygons, it goes around the raster cells. The boundaries of the polygon follow the raster cells exactly. If I do have it simplify, if I have a bunch of rasters kind of zigzagging across, it's going to try to make that a straight line instead. If I really want to preserve my areas, I will not simplify my polygons. So I'll click OK now, and it's going to run, and it'll take a moment to convert, but not that long. And then it should provide me a new vector polygon layer in my table of contents when it's done. So when it shows up, the whole area is covered, not just the area that is less than 10 degrees, and that's because it converts every portion of the raster to polygon, but it does it on the basis of that value field, or that value of each cell, and puts feature boundaries in between spots where the values aren't the same. So if I was to make this slightly transparent, we'd see that those boundaries align with the changes in color here. Let's make that boundary a little darker. So we can see that that boundary coincides with where the cells change. That makes sense. So if I want my polygons to only cover the areas that were less than 10 degrees, I now need to look at the attribute table and see that it puts a field called grid code, and it puts the actual value of the raster as an attribute of the polygon. And I can now subset that grid code field, or the features based on that grid code field, in order to only show what I want. So since 1 in this case, if we remember our raster calculator, means it was less than 10% or 10 degrees slope, let's make a definition query. So I'll go to query builder and I'll put grid code equals 1, click OK, and then click OK again. And what I get back is just the portions of the feature class, let's make it not transparent anymore. Just the portions of the feature class that were less than 10 degrees of slope. And everything else is transparent and we can see the background through it. That'll be a little clearer if I make this a different darker color here. So everything else is transparent there. If I wanted to make that permanent though and make a new data set that only had that data, I would need to do something like a selection and then export my data, a process that you should be familiar with by now. That's one way of converting our data. We also have tools that convert from vector data to raster data. We can rasterize our vector data. Just like tabulate area did when we passed in our feature data, it turned it into rasters in the background. We can specify a cell size and some other information and get a raster from our feature data. So let's look at the to raster data or tool set here, and we can go polygon to raster. So we can provide, just like we did before, we can provide our input features, and we can provide a field which to convert on, and then how to assign the cells. You'll learn a bit more about that in the next lesson on rasters, where we'll talk about different or reprojecting rasters and implications of that. But basically it's how do we determine whether or not a raster cell gets one polygon's value or another. So that's the cell assignment type, and then we can also set the cell size. So I'm not going to run this right now, but know that you can convert between raster and polygon and raster. Generally speaking, you do want to do your analysis in one or the other. You don't necessarily want to be going back and forth because there's a loss of information that occurs there, but it's possible to do some work in one and bring it back to the other, not just with zonal statistics. And as I said, a lot of the rest of these conversion tools are converting between data formats and not data types. And a lot of that data format conversion is available to you just when you go to the data, export data. You can choose what data type or data format to export it as here. And so you don't necessarily need the conversion tools for that all the time. A lot of times in the interface that's just available to you automatically. But for automation or for other workflows, it's available as a geoprocessing tool as well. Okay, that's it for this lecture. In this lecture, I showed you some different conversion tools available in ArcGIS for converting between different data formats and different data types. And then we learned about converting from raster data to vector data, and then a little bit about converting back from vector data to raster data as well. I hope it was helpful, and we'll see you next time.